In politics, as in life, there is always pushback. There is no such thing as unconstrained forever force. So, even when you get a leader as powerful as Donald Trump, the story does not end with him. That's clear tonight, I think, as we look at plunging American markets after he doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminium and threatened to essentially permanently shut down Canada's car-making industry, which accounts for 10% of its manufacturing base. In New York, the Dow Jones was down by 400 points. But President Trump is showing absolutely no signs yet of changing course, repeating again his insistence that Canada should become the 51st state of the US. You can see signs of pushback against him everywhere, even below the surface in these talks in Ukraine going on in Saudi Arabia. He, remember, made this about President Zelensky's weakness and stubbornness. In Trump's words, he doesn't hold any cards, and yet he's against peace. Well, last night, Ukraine played a card of its own by hitting Moscow with a drone attack, while also insisting that nobody wants a peace deal more than Ukraine. So far, we don't really know how Trump will respond to that, but the really important point is pushback. Never turn your back on politics or walk away thinking that's all over. It's never over. And first tonight, we're going direct to Wall Street to hear from the analyst and options trader, Jon Najarian. Jon, great to have you on the show. How does somebody like you cope with the twists and turns of Trump day by day by day? It must be almost impossible.
It certainly is a challenge, Andrew. But as you said, politics is something that is never stable. It is always liquid, if you will. It is mercurial. I think what we're looking at right now is, of course, Trump digging in his heels. The markets do not like it. The markets fear that much of what is happening right now, at least in the very short term, is going to be negative for the markets. Now, Trump's willing to put up with that for now, but we'll see how much longer he will be willing to put up with that, Andrew.
There was an interesting moment in the White House press conference just a few moments ago when a reporter asked whether anybody in the White House had been shorting the Dow Jones, which is down, I think, 400 points. And the answer was no. But this is getting all a bit wild. I can understand that for someone like you, there are obvious stocks going up and down. Stellantis, which is a Canadian car maker, by and large, in North America, has seen its share price go scooting down. Some American steel makers are going up, and that is all, I guess, predictable. But what is your view about the short-term prospects for the Dow and for the other big markets?
Well, since these tariffs have been kicking in and accelerating in some cases, like the 50% move that you talked about for aluminium and steel in Canada imports to the United States, that's going to virtually stop those imports. So investors are shaken, but like your James Bond, but not stirred. They're certainly not stirring to buy right now. They are instead seeking some sort of refuge, and that refuge might be the VIX. This is a volatility play for the S&P 500. There have been big institutional players that have been hedging downward movement in the market. And since they've been putting on those hedges about February 19th or so, those hedges have more than doubled. So some people are finding ways to offset the damage that's done to their portfolios, since most of us are long, of course, meaning we own stocks. But certainly there are a lot of bets that the markets could see more downside. If I would point out one bright spot, some of those really big trades were unwound today. In other words, with the market down, as you said, 400 or 500 points today, some of those large institutional bets were unwound, meaning they sold that big profit that they had, and they haven't reestablished another trade yet. But they could, of course. We've still got hours to trade in the New York and Chicago markets.
And there's always an angle. But when it comes to the longer-term future, this word recession is recurring again and again. I spoke to another analyst yesterday who said, on balance, he thought it was more than 50% likely now that there would be a recession. Donald Trump, promised the most glorious, great golden times for America after he was elected. Yep. In your view, are you heading for recession?
I think we will be teetering close to it, but I do not think that we will go into that. Believe it or not, even in the United States, Andrew, we've been talking about eggs because the avian flu and so forth wiped out so many chickens that eggs and the price of a dozen eggs went over $8. They have now come down by about 25%. So the more we see an easing in some of these prices that are, again, very, very short-term jumps in price that impacts, of course, inflation and recession fears, the more we pull back from that, the less chance that we dive into a recession. So I'd still put the chances at 40-60 rather than 50-50.
That's really interesting. One other specific area I want to ask you about, which is defense stocks, because some of the bigger American defense industries were down quite a bit on the thinking that the Europeans are going to spend a lot more money on defense, but with European companies like the big German Rheinmetall and the other European defense makers. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense for both of us. I think that in all likelihood, defense stocks would be a logical place for people to seek refuge over the next few weeks. But for the short term, also, I think this is another industry that had a tremendous run up. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and a host of the drone makers like AVAV and so forth. Many of those have been hit pretty hard in recent weeks, but we all know they have to restock the supplies. And eventually, those stocks, I think, will be in sharp focus going into the second half, at least, of 2025.
Really, really interesting. You've got a busy few hours ahead of you, I know, Jon Najarian on Wall Street. Thank you very much for talking to LBC. Right, so quite exciting being a trader at the moment. But what about the bigger picture and the longer-term investor? That is rather different. Let's talk now to Maurice Obstfeld, formerly the chief economist at the IMF. Maurice, great to have you on the show. Can I ask you your overview of where we are in terms of prospects of recession and how the markets are responding to those early moves by Donald Trump, and I guess his disinclination to listen to the markets in a way that he has in the past?
Markets are responding to a degree of policy uncertainty that may be unprecedented since the pandemic. We're seeing a very erratic style of policymaking by a single decision maker without a lot of rhyme or reason. Why attack your allies, your free trade area partners, with the kind of fury and anger that he is displaying? Sure, there are issues about the border, there are issues about fentanyl, but both countries are working on dealing with those problems. All during the campaign, China was viewed as a much worse bogeyman. They're getting treated with kid gloves compared to Canada and Mexico. So for the business community, they don't know what's going on. The uncertainty is huge. They need to plan. They need to invest. And everyone is really frozen in place as these new initiatives come out day by day.
And this may go on for a long time. There was a view early on that Donald Trump was using tariffs as a way, frankly, of getting other countries' attention. And once he'd got their attention, they would fall away again quite quickly. But it looks like the fight with Canada in particular, and the governor of Ontario, who's put extra levies on electricity flowing into the US, is going to go on and on and on.
It's just not clear what the end game is here, what the end goal is here. And there's the possibility that we will get now reciprocal tariffs and more retaliation from other countries. So we seem to be going through the looking glass here to someplace we really haven't been since the 1930s.
Since the 1930s. Well, I know here in Britain we are still waiting to see whether we are included in the extra tariffs coming in the middle of this week. But the inclination in Downing Street is that Britain will not respond with reciprocal tariffs initially. Just for people listening, give them a sense of what a proper tit-for-tat tariff war around the world would do to the prosperity of people, frankly, listening to this program, thinking about their pensions, thinking about their employers.
Well, we've already had a pretty big effect on pensions and I dare say pensions around the world. A large-scale trade war could lead to a large-scale global recession. Many countries depend on trade. It's the lifeblood of growth of international commerce. And you inject this degree of uncertainty into the process and everything freezes up. So I don't foresee anything good coming of this unless some sense of sanity can be restored.
Mm. I mean, there are people in the Trump campaign and in the MAGA movement who see tariffs, frankly, as a way of taxing other countries to the benefit of Americans, so much so that eventually you can get rid of income tax in America entirely and all the money is raised by tariffs. Again, for people listening, can you explain why that is a bad idea or might not work out that way?
Well, it won't work out because the amount of imports coming into the U.S., which is the tax base for these tariffs, is simply not big enough. I do think that the Republican Congress will seek to incorporate some base amount of tariff revenue into the budget they're working on and use that as a way to claim that they are lowering income taxes, or more exactly extending the previous tax cuts without blowing up the deficit too much. But we have to recognize that a tariff is a highly regressive tax, and the tax cuts being extended benefit primarily people in the upper income brackets. So this is really going to be problematic for a country where inequality is already high.
Mm. A really grim prospect, therefore, internationally and also for people in the United States. Maury, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. The view there of somebody who's chief economist at the IMF.